Henry Richards was just trying to get home. He walked down Oak Creek Drive with his tool case pulling on his shoulder and his knees arguing with every step. He was tired in that deep, heavy way that starts in the feet and climbs up the spine. He had already decided he would not answer the phone for anyone that night. Then he heard that strange, sharp cry. Henry stopped, one foot on the curb, the other on the street. He turned his head toward the cul-de-sac at the end of the block and listened. For a moment there was nothing. Then it came again, higher this time and desperate. He saw the puppy then, a flash of gold racing in a wild circle at the center of the dead-end street. The little dog darted one way, then the other, then suddenly locked onto Henry's shape and sprinted straight at him. "Easy, boy," Henry muttered, shifting his tool case to his other hand. He expected a playful jump or a sniff at his boots. Instead, the puppy skidded to a stop just out of reach, nails scraping the asphalt, chest pumping. The dog stared up at Henry for one long second, eyes wide and dark, then spun and tore back toward the middle of the cul-de-sac. He ran straight to the round iron cover set in the road and threw himself at it again. Henry frowned. He had seen a lot of dogs in his life, and he knew the difference between play and panic. Hi, my amazing friends and family, welcome back to another story for today. If you are ready to enjoy this heartwarming story, smash the subscribe button and comment where you're watching from. I love seeing all your names and places. Also, don't forget to check out more of our interesting videos on the channel. And guess what? Tomorrow, I have got an even more exciting story to share with you that I know you'll love. Now, back to the story. This was Panic. He walked toward the puppy, his boots heavy on the road. With every step, the little dog's movements grew sharper, more frantic. He clawed at the manhole cover. He pressed his head against it. He let out another ragged cry that sounded like it hurt his own throat. "What's wrong with you?" Henry asked under his breath. There was no one else around, no kids in yards, no cars rolling past. The houses sat quiet and still, blinds half drawn. It felt like the whole street was holding its breath and had left this one small animal to make all the noise. Henry reached the cover and slowly dropped to one knee, his joints protesting. He set the tool case down beside him and reached out. When his hand touched the puppy's back, the dog flinched, but instead of running he pushed closer, leaning hard into the contact for half a heartbeat. Then he tore away again and slammed both front paws onto the iron. Henry leaned in, putting his ear close to one of the small openings. At first he heard only his own breathing and the dull hum of the town in the distance. Then he caught a faint splash from somewhere below. He held his breath and listened harder. There it was again, water slapping against concrete. After that came a sound he knew too well, because he had heard it in other drains under other streets, a low, worn-out whine of an animal that had been crying too long. His stomach tightened. Henry drew back and looked at the puppy. The little dog stared at him as if waiting for a verdict. "There's someone down there, isn't there?" Henry said. The puppy answered with a short, sharp bark and threw himself at the cover yet again. Henry did not need more proof. He knew these storm drains. He had helped lay some of the lines years earlier. He also knew the schedule. He checked the watch on his wrist, the same scratched metal he had worn on job sites for decades. The hands pointed at 7:15. The automatic flush on this line started at 7:30 in the evening, every evening, no matter what. The system did not care if a dog was inside. "All right," he said, more to himself than to the pup. "We've got 15 minutes. Maybe less." He slid both hands to the edge of the manhole cover and tried to lift. The metal was rough and dry under his fingers, but it did not move at all. Years of grit and sealant had glued it in place. Henry dug his fingers into the narrow lip and strained again. He grunted with effort. His shoulders burned, and a dull ache started up in his lower back. Nothing. The cover was heavy even when it was loose, and right now it was not loose at all. Beneath them came another faint splash, then a broken whimper that rose and faded like someone losing strength. The puppy let out a low growl, as if he understood they were running out of time. Henry let go of the cover and sat back on his heels for 1 second. He rubbed his palms against the cloth of his coveralls and forced his brain to slow down. Panic never opened anything. "Okay, boy," he said, tipping his chin at the puppy. "You picked the right old man." He reached for the orange tool case, flipped the latches, and lifted the lid. Inside, everything was in its place. A lifetime of habit lived in that foam and metal. His hand went straight to the long pry bar and the small, portable hydraulic jack. He had carried that jack home from a job more times than he could count. Tonight he was grateful he had not left it at the shop. He slid the flat end of the pry bar into the small slot in the manhole cover. The metal shrieked as it scraped into position. The sound made the puppy jump, but he did not run away. He pressed closer, nose almost touching Henry's elbow. "Back up a bit," Henry said. He nudged the dog gently with his arm, just enough to keep him out of the way. The puppy shuffled back a few inches but stayed close, shaking. Henry braced his boots, wrapped both hands around the bar, and heaved. The bar bent a little but held. For a long moment nothing else changed. The cover stayed married to the road. Henry's teeth ground together from the strain. His arms felt like they were on fire. Then something deep in the rim gave way. The sound was a rough crack, like a branch snapping in a quiet yard. The cover shifted by the smallest fraction. That was all he needed. He adjusted the bar, pushed again, and when the edge of the cover rose just enough for a narrow gap, he shoved the jack under with his boot. The puppy barked, startled by the sudden movement. Henry pumped the handle. The jack rose inch by inch, pushing against the underside of the cover. The iron complained, but it lifted. The gap widened. Cold, damp stink rushed out, strong and sour, carrying the smell of old water and rotting leaves. Henry ignored it. He focused on the sound from below. It was clearer now, a steady slap of liquid against concrete and the uneven paddling of a tired body. A rough whine floated up, followed by a stronger splash, as if whoever was down there could feel something changing overhead. The puppy leaned toward the opening, whining loudly. Henry hooked one arm around the dog's chest, holding him back while he used his other arm to shove the cover sideways. The thick iron disc scraped along the rim, then finally slid free and landed on the road beside them with a heavy thud that vibrated up Henry's arms. The hole in the street was open now, a round mouth leading into darkness. Henry clipped his flashlight to the front of his coveralls and aimed it straight down. The beam cut through the gloom and hit the water below. It showed a narrow shaft of smooth concrete 6 feet deep, half filled with dark water that moved in restless circles. In the middle of that shifting pool, a golden head struggled to stay above the surface. The dog was a full-grown golden retriever, her coat soaked to a darker shade and plastered to her body. She paddled with her front legs, but one of her back legs floated oddly, not joining the effort at all. Her eyes were wide and bright in the harsh light, and they locked on Henry the moment the beam found her. She gave a hoarse bark that broke halfway through into a wet cough. The puppy let out a high cry in answer. He tried to jump again, but Henry's arm held firm across his chest. "That's your mom, isn't it?" Henry said. The words came out rough. The puppy twisted his head and looked up at Henry as if to say, "Yes, hurry," and then he stared back down. The adult dog paddled in a tight circle, hitting the wall with her shoulders. She tried to push herself upward, but there were no footholds, no ladder rungs, nothing. She slid down again, head dipping halfway under before she fought back up. Henry could see how tired she was. Every movement looked heavier than the last. He also felt something else now, a low, steady vibration under his knees and palms. Far away in the network of pipes, the flush system was starting to wake. They were burning minutes they did not have. "Hang on, girl," he called down to her. "Stay with me." She stopped struggling for a second and looked directly into the light. Something in her gaze settled him. She was scared, but she had not given up. Henry pulled on a work glove, then planted both hands on the rim of the opening. "Stay," he told the puppy. The command came out short and sharp. To his surprise, the little dog actually froze, muscles bunched, leashless yet rooted to the spot by the tone in Henry's voice. Henry swung one leg into the opening. There was no ledge, just air. He let the leg hang until his boot hovered just above the surface. The smell from below was stronger now, sour and dirty and cold. He ignored it again. He lowered himself into the hole until the metal rim dug into his stomach and ribs. His shoulders groaned under his own weight. The flashlight beam shook a little with the effort, but it stayed on the dog. She paddled closer, snout lifting toward his boots. "Good girl," he said. His voice sounded steady even though his muscles were not. "Come on. Right under me." She obeyed, guided by his voice and the light. When she was directly below him, he took a slow breath, shifted his weight, and stretched his right arm down into the shaft as far as it would go. His fingers brushed wet fur. "There you are," he muttered. He slid his hand along her neck until he felt the solid band of a collar. He gripped it tightly. With his left hand, he searched for a better hold on the rim above, fingers digging into every nick and rough spot. Then he started to lift. The strain was immediate and brutal. The dog was heavy, and water added weight. His shoulders screamed. His elbows shook. His ribs pressed hard against the edge of the opening, and for a second he thought the bone might give. The dog helped as much as she could, beating her front paws against the wall, but the broken back leg dragged uselessly behind her. She let out a sharp yelp when it bumped the concrete, and her body twisted instinctively away from the pain, almost yanking her collar out of Henry's wet grip. "No you don't," Henry said through clenched teeth. He tightened his hold and pulled harder, using every bit of strength in his arms and back. The dog's chest rose above the water. Then her shoulders. His feet, still braced on the road outside the opening, started to slide. The rough edge of the rim tore at the cloth of his coveralls and bit into the skin beneath. The flashlight shook wildly, throwing jerky shadows across the inside of the shaft. The puppy barked nonstop now, backing up a step and then rushing forward like he wanted to help but didn't know how. Henry felt his grip slipping. The wet nylon of the collar moved under his hand. The dog's body sagged, and for a terrifying moment she dropped an inch back toward the water. The vibration under Henry's chest grew stronger. Somewhere unseen, heavy valves were shifting into place. The system was almost ready to send a surge of water through these pipes. If she fell back in now, he would never get her out in time. "Come on," he growled, not sure if he was talking to himself, the dog, or whatever force ran the world. He dug his boots into the asphalt, bent his knees just a little, and then heaved his whole body backward in one rough motion. The move dragged the dog upward. Her front paws cleared the rim and landed on the street beside the opening, nails scraping hard against the road. Henry used that moment, shifted his grip from the collar to the fur and skin behind her shoulders, and rolled his weight further back. The dog's heavy body slid over the edge, thumped onto his chest for a second, then toppled beside him onto the asphalt. Henry's body followed. He landed on his back with a dull smack that knocked the air from his lungs. For 2 seconds he lay there staring at the darkening sky, chest heaving, arms burning as if he had just done 100 push-ups in one go. Then a new sound forced him to move. Water roared somewhere below, a deep rushing thunder that filled the manhole and the pipes beyond. He rolled onto his side and saw the open shaft frothing with fast water as it rushed past the empty space where the dog had been moments before. The golden retriever lay on her side on the road, soaked and shaking. One back leg stuck out at an unnatural angle. Her eyes darted around wildly until they found Henry. She dragged herself toward him, leaving a wet trail behind, and rested her head on his knee. The puppy finally broke free of the frozen spot he had held and launched himself at her. He climbed over her neck and shoulders, whining in short bursts, licking her face and ears and eyes like he had to touch every part just to believe she was there. The mother dog gave a tired huff and nudged him with her nose. Her tail thumped weakly once against the road. Henry sat up slowly. His chest hurt, his arms trembled, and his ribs screamed from the pressure of the metal rim, but he was alive and the dog was alive. The world around them began to move again. A door opened down the street. A porch light blinked on. Then a woman's voice carried across the cul-de-sac, sharp with worry. "Goldie? Buster? Where are you?" The puppy's ears twitched. He looked toward the voice, then back at Henry, then at his mother. His tail started to wag hard, even though the rest of him still shook. Henry rested one hand on the mother dog's head and another on the pup's back. The drain beneath them kept roaring, as if it wanted to remind everyone how close it had come to taking something that mattered. Henry drew in a breath to shout for help, but before he could get a word out, Goldie's body went suddenly limp against his leg, her eyes glazing as her head began to slide off his knee. Henry grabbed Goldie's head before it hit the pavement and turned her toward him, but her eyes were rolling back and her tongue slackened, and that scared him more than the drain ever had. Hey, stay with me, he muttered, his voice rough, and he slid his hand down to her chest, pressing his fingers hard against her ribs to feel for movement. For a second there was nothing, not even a twitch, and the street and the roar from the open drain blurred at the edges as his heart hammered in his ears, but then under his fingertips he caught the weakest rise, a thin flutter that could vanish at any moment. Buster must have sensed it too, because his wild licking turned into choppy little whines as he pressed his small body against his mother's side like he could keep her here just by holding her down. Henry knew he didn't have time to think, so he shoved away his shock and rolled Goldie gently onto her side, tilting her head so her airway stayed open the way he remembered from an old first aid course they had made him take at the yard. Her breathing stayed shallow and ragged, and every few seconds her chest seemed to forget what it was supposed to do until another weak breath dragged itself in. Goldie? Buster? The woman's voice called again, closer now, and there was a quick rhythm of running footsteps on concrete. Henry lifted his head and saw a woman in her 40s racing down the sidewalk in sandals, her hair pulled back in a loose knot that was coming apart as she ran. A man followed her, taller and broader, still trying to shove his feet into shoes as he stumbled after her. Both of them froze at the edge of the cul-de-sac when they saw the scene in the middle of the road. The open manhole, the drenched dog on the ground, the puppy pawing at her, and a stranger in greasy coveralls kneeling there with his hands on their dog. "Oh my God," the woman breathed, and then everything sped up at once. "Goldie," she screamed, and she ran straight to them, dropping to her knees so fast her skin scraped against the asphalt. The man reached them a second later, chest heaving, eyes wide. Buster barked once when they arrived, as if to announce them, then went right back to nuzzling his mother's face. "She fell in the storm drain," Henry said quickly, because he saw their eyes jumping from the open hole to the dog's twisted leg to him, and he needed them to hear the important part first. "She was in the water. She's breathing but barely. I had to haul her out." The woman's hands shook as she ran them over Goldie's wet fur, and her voice came out in a choked rush. "Goldie, baby, look at me. Mike, her leg, look at her leg." The man, swallowed hard and crouched down, his jaw tightening when he saw the angle of the back leg. "We need to get her to a vet," he said, his voice flat in that way some people use to hold panic back. "Now." "She almost drowned," Henry insisted, because he could hear that roaring water under the street and picture the seconds they had nearly lost. "She went limp just now. We don't have time to wait for anyone. Who's closest?" The woman tore her gaze off the dog long enough to answer. "Nina. Dr. Perez. Oak Ridge Animal Clinic, 10 minutes away if there's no traffic." She looked like she might cry, but the tears hadn't quite arrived. "Can you drive?" Henry asked Mike, already knowing the answer from the way the man's hands trembled. Mike shook his head, breathed out sharply, and said, "You drive. My truck is closer to the clinic, but I'm not sure I can." His voice cracked and he looked away. Henry did not push. He simply nodded once. "All right, we'll take my truck, it's right around the corner. She needs to be kept as steady as we can manage. I'll carry her. You get the pup and open the doors." Buster yelped when Henry slid his arms under Goldie's body, one arm under her chest and the other under her hips, careful not to move the broken leg more than he had to. Goldie groaned, a low sound deep in her throat, and her head rolled against his shoulder, but she did not fight him. She just hung there, heavy and limp and dripping. He pushed himself up with a grunt and stood, his legs stinging from the strain but holding. The manhole still gaped beside them, water thundering down below, but Henry forced himself not to look at it again. He filed it away in the back of his mind for later, because right now everything that mattered was in his arms. "Buster, come," the woman said tightly, and the puppy obeyed at once, trotting at her heel, though he kept glancing back at his mother and letting out worried little sounds. As they hurried down the street together, neighbors started emerging onto porches, drawn by the yelling and the thud of the manhole cover and the roar from the open drain. Someone called, "Everything okay out there?" But nobody answered, because nothing about this was okay yet. Henry rounded the corner to where his old pickup sat in front of his house. He yanked the driver's side door open with one hand, then jerked his head at the passenger door. "Back seat," he said. "Lay her there, keep her head straight. Hold her if you have to." The woman, Laura as he heard Mike call her now, opened the far door with fumbling fingers and climbed into clear space, kicking aside a couple of stray tools and an old coat. Henry eased Goldie onto the seat as gently as he could. She whimpered once, then fell quiet again, her chest stuttering. Laura slid in beside her and cradled the dog's head in her lap, one hand resting over Goldie's ribs to feel each fragile breath. Mike scooped Buster up and climbed into the cab, settling the puppy on his knees. Buster tried to climb over the seat toward his mother, but Mike held him back with both arms, murmuring, "Stay, boy, stay," over and over in a shaky voice. Henry slammed his door, turned the key, and the engine rumbled to life. He pulled out faster than he usually would on their quiet street, tires biting into the pavement. In the rearview mirror he could see Laura bending over Goldie, her lips moving constantly, maybe praying, maybe just saying the dog's name again and again. "Talk to me," Henry said, eyes on the road as he guided the truck through the neighborhood toward the main road. "How's her breathing?" "Shallow," Laura answered immediately. She's wheezing a little. Still there though. "Goldie, baby, stay with us." "Mike, she's not looking at me." "She's in shock," Henry said, because the words were easier than saying he didn't know if she would make it. "The vet will know what to do. Just keep your hand on her so she knows she's not alone." "Who are you?" Mike asked suddenly, sounding like the question had just broken through a wall in his mind. Henry's fingers tightened on the steering wheel, but he kept his tone steady. "Name's Henry Richards. I live 2 blocks from you. I was walking home when your pup found me. He wouldn't leave that drain alone. If he hadn't..." He did not finish the sentence, and he didn't need to, because Laura let out a sharp sound that might have been a sob. "He came back for me," she whispered to Buster, who whined and pushed his nose against her elbow from the front seat. "You good boy, you smart, brave boy." Buster's tail thumped weakly, but his eyes stayed locked on his mother's still form in the back. They hit a red light near the shopping center, and for a second Henry nearly blew through it because every second felt borrowed, but there was cross traffic and he could not risk a crash. He smacked the steering wheel once in frustration as they waited. In that tiny pause, Goldie's chest seemed to pause too. "She stopped," Laura choked out. "I don't feel wait, there it is. It's back. It's so faint, Mike, I can barely feel it." Mike pressed his free hand to his forehead and swore under his breath. He looked at Henry, eyes bright with fear. "If she dies," he started, then shook his head. "She can't die. My kids, they'll be home any minute. They just went for ice cream with my sister. We told them we'd see them when they got back. If she's just gone..." His voice failed completely then. Henry did not have children at home anymore, but he remembered what it felt like when his boys were small and the dog was part of the unit, just as important as any person when it came to keeping the house feeling whole. He swallowed hard. "She's not gone yet," he said. "We're not giving her to the dark until someone who knows more than we do says there's nothing else." The light turned green and he floored it, the truck leaping forward. They reached the low brick building of Oak Ridge Animal Clinic in a blur. The parking lot was half full. A couple of people sat on a bench near the entrance with carriers at their feet. As Henry swung the truck into a spot right by the door, heads turned toward them. Before the engine had even stopped, Laura was calling, "Help! We need help out here." Her voice cracked so badly on the last word that people moved without thinking. A vet tech in blue scrubs burst through the clinic doors, taking in the scene in one wide sweep. The soaking wet dog being dragged carefully from the truck, the twisted leg, the puppy straining against Mike's arms, and the gray-haired man in coveralls lifting Goldie like she was made of glass. "What happened?" the tech demanded, hurrying forward with a rolling gurney. "Storm drain," Henry said. "She was trapped in water. Almost went under. Back legs busted, she might have inhaled a lot." "Get her inside," the tech said to another worker who had followed her out. "Tell Dr. Perez we've got an emergency trauma. Possible near drowning, possible fracture." They slid Goldie onto the gurney while Laura clung to her head, crying her name over and over. Buster barked desperately as the gurney started moving, pulling until the collar pressed into his neck. Mike looked torn in half between the puppy and his wife and the dog on the cart. Let him come, Henry said quietly. He's part of this too. The tech glanced at Buster and nodded once. As long as he doesn't get in the way. They all rushed into the clinic together, the automatic door sliding open, the smell of antiseptic and animals hitting them at once. The waiting room fell silent as everyone watched the group push past the chairs toward the swinging door that led to the treatment area. I'm Laura Carlson, Laura said roughly to the woman in the white coat who came out to meet them. This is Goldie, our dog. Please, she can't. Dr. Nina Perez laid a firm hand on Laura's shoulder, steadying her. She was in her 50s, her dark hair pulled back tight, her eyes sharp and assessing. We're going to do everything we can, she said. Her tone held no fluff, only quiet authority. Right now I need you to step back and let us work. You can talk to her while we set up, but don't touch anything else. Laura nodded shakily and stayed by Goldie's head as the gurney rolled through the doors. Henry and Mike followed until a nurse held out an arm. Family only back here, she said gently. Mike grabbed Henry's sleeve. He saved her, he said quickly. He pulled her out. He's part of this. Nina looked up from the gurney, eyes flicking to Henry, taking in the dirt, the wet stains on his coveralls, and the red marks across his ribs where the manhole rim had dug in. For a moment Henry thought she might send him out anyway, but instead she nodded once. Fine. Stay by the wall. Don't get in my way. They crowded into the small treatment room, hearts pounding as Nina and her team moved around Goldie with practiced speed. Someone shaved a small patch on Goldie's front leg and slid a needle in for fluids. Another tech placed a clear mask over her muzzle and adjusted the oxygen line. The puppy whined and trembled in Mike's arms, his nails digging into Mike's shirt. Every few seconds he tried to leap toward the table, and every time Mike whispered, I know, buddy, I know, while holding him tighter. Henry stood near the wall, hands fisted at his sides, watching the monitors being clipped onto damp fur, watching the numbers appear, heart rate, oxygen level, all the things he had never cared about until this moment. Nina bent close to Goldie's chest, listening with a stethoscope, her brow furrowing. She pressed lightly along the ribs and belly, and Goldie flinched at certain spots even through her fading awareness. She's aspirated some water, Nina said over her shoulder. Breathing is weak. That leg is definitely broken, maybe more than one fracture. She's in shock. I need you to step back now, Laura. We're going to intubate and get better control of her breathing. After that we'll check for internal injuries with an ultrasound and x-rays. The words came fast, but the weight of them landed fully. Laura kissed Goldie's forehead once, whispered something into her ear, and then let a nurse guide her away from the table. Nina's face shifted from soft to sharp as she focused on the work. Henry watched as they slid a tube down Goldie's throat, taped it in place, and attached it to a machine that pushed measured breaths into her lungs. Her chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm that made Henry want to sag with relief, but he knew it was only the machine doing the work. The dog herself was far from safe. After what felt like both a minute and an hour, Nina straightened and pulled her gloves off. She looked at the group, Laura with her hands clasped so tight her knuckles were white, Mike holding Buster, Henry standing just inside the doorway as if his boots had grown roots. We've stabilized her for the moment, Nina said. Now we need to get images and see what we're really dealing with. You all should wait in the front while we do that. I'll come talk to you as soon as I know more. Is she going to live? Laura asked, voice small and flat. Nina did not offer easy comfort. Right now she's fighting, she said. Let her fight and let us help her. I can't promise anything yet. The nurse ushered them back out to the waiting room. The door swung shut behind them, cutting off the view of Goldie's limp form surrounded by machines. The room felt too bright, with posters of smiling pets on the walls and a faint buzzing from a vending machine in the corner. Laura dropped into a chair and buried her face in her hands. Mike sat beside her, still gripping Buster, who had finally stopped struggling and now sat motionless on his lap, staring at the closed door with big, dark eyes. Henry stayed standing for a moment, not sure if he should sit with them or give them space, but then Laura reached out blindly and caught his sleeve. Don't go, she said, not looking up. Please. So he sat on her other side, wincing as his ribs protested. For a while nobody spoke. The only sounds were the muffled voices from behind the reception desk and the occasional sniff from Laura. Finally Mike cleared his throat. "You said the drain almost flushed her away," he said quietly to Henry. "What did you mean by that?" Henry stared at his own hands, noticing for the first time that they were still shaking. "Those drains are on an automatic system," he said. "They send a surge of water through to clear debris. It's on a timer. It was due any minute when I got there. If your pup hadn't pulled me over when he did, I never would have heard her in time. She would have been gone by the time the system kicked in." Mike's jaw tightened. The city knows that can happen? That animals can get trapped like that? "They know things can fall in," Henry said. He hesitated, then added, "I used to work for them. Utilities. Storm systems. I've been asking them to replace some of those covers for years. They're old, they rust, they seize up. If that cover hadn't been stuck, she might not have gotten trapped as long, but I also might never have noticed the pup trying to dig her out." Laura lifted her head, eyes red. "You're saying this didn't have to happen?" Henry opened his mouth, then shut it again, because he could hear the weight behind that question. If he said yes, then the anger would have somewhere to go, and it would be toward people he had once called his own. If he said no, he would be lying. "I'm saying it shouldn't be this hard to open a drain in an emergency," he said finally. "And I'm saying I walked away from that job 3 years ago when I should have kept fighting. That's on me." Mike stared at him like he wanted to ask more, but at that moment the door at the far end of the waiting room opened again. Everyone's heads snapped up. Nina stood there, still in her white coat, her expression grimmer than before. She glanced at the family, then at Henry, then back again, and the silence in the room deepened. Buster let out a soft, uncertain whine that seemed to hang in the air. Nina walked toward them, each step measured, and when she stopped in front of them her first words were not what any of them expected. "Before I tell you what we found," she said, her voice low, "I need to ask something important. Who exactly opened that manhole, and did anyone from the city see you do it?" Henry felt every eye in the waiting room land on him at the same time. Mike turned his head slowly, and even Buster seemed to stare up at Henry like he understood the question. For a moment Henry thought about dodging it, but he had never been good at lying and this was not the time to start. "I opened it," he said. His own voice surprised him. It sounded steady even though his chest was still tight. "Nobody from the city was there. It was just me and your dog and the pup. I used my own tools. No one told me to do it." Nina studied his face like she was reading a chart. "You're sure no one in a city truck drove by? No one took pictures? No neighbors from the street yelling at you to stop?" Henry shook his head. "People came out after they heard the cover move and the shouting, but that was after I'd pulled her out. I don't think anyone had a camera in their hand. They were just staring." Laura's voice cut in, raw and sharp. "Why does it matter who opened it? He saved her. Is somebody going to make that a problem now?" Nina turned to her, and some of the hardness in her eyes eased. "I'm not trying to scare you," she said. "But if the city decides that manhole was tampered with, they might try to make this about liability instead of what actually happened. I need to know how careful we have to be when we talk to them." Mike frowned. "Why would we talk to them at all? We just want our dog alive." "Because," Nina said, and now she looked at Henry again, "Goldie's injuries tell a story. And the story doesn't make the city look very good." Everyone went silent. Buster let out a tiny whine and pushed his nose into Mike's elbow. Nina pulled a chair over and sat down facing them. That alone made Henry uneasy. Vets did not usually sit like that unless they had heavy news. "We did x-rays and an ultrasound," she said. "The good news is her lungs are holding. She did take in water, but we got to her in time. She's on oxygen and fluids. She's not out of danger, but we have a real shot at keeping her here." Laura's shoulders sagged with relief. Her hand flew to her mouth, and for a second Henry thought she might try to hug Nina, but then the vet lifted a hand slightly, stopping any rush of joy. "The bad news is her back leg is badly broken in 2 places, and she has bruising from a heavy impact on her side. She hit something hard when she fell. The fall itself is what did the worst damage." Mike closed his eyes. "So the great," he whispered. "The drop. Nina nodded. She either slipped or was forced in. The impact lines don't look like a shallow stumble. They look like a full drop. She looked at Henry. That's why I asked. Someone needs to report the dangerous opening, and if that someone is the same person who ripped it open with tools, the city will be very quick to move the conversation away from the fact that a dog could fall in there in the first place. Henry rubbed a hand over his face. I didn't have a choice, he said. She was drowning. That system is on a timer. I know, Nina replied. And I'm not judging you. I'm asking if you're ready for a fight, because you might have one on your hands. Laura's relief turned into anger so fast it made her head spin. She straightened in her chair and snapped. If they want to fight, then they can come look my kids in the eye and tell them why their dog nearly died in a hole in the middle of our road. Mike put a hand on her arm, trying to calm her, but his jaw stayed tight. What do you need from us? He asked Nina. Right now. Nina glanced through the small window in the door toward the treatment area, even though they could not see Goldie from here. Right now, you need to rest for a few minutes and let my staff keep working. I'll know more about surgery options for the leg once her vitals stabilize a bit more. As for the city, I'm going to document everything thoroughly. Photos, notes, times. Henry, I need you to tell me exactly what happened from the moment you heard the puppy to the moment you got her out. No hero stuff, no glossing over the parts that might look messy, just the plain truth. Henry nodded slowly. You'll get it, he said. All of it. Nina held his gaze for another second, then stood. Good. I'm on your side. But tell me the whole truth now so we don't get blindsided later. I'll have a tech bring you some water. I'll come back when I have an update. She left them sitting there with their fear and their thoughts. After a few beats, Laura leaned forward, elbows on her knees, and stared at the floor. I can't believe this, she whispered. We walk that street every day. The kids ride their bikes around that cul-de-sac. We joke that it's the safest spot in the neighborhood. And all this time there's a trap in the middle of it. It's not supposed to be a trap, Henry said quietly. It's supposed to move water, not swallow dogs. But it hasn't been looked after the way it should. Mike turned to him again. You said you used to work for the city, he said. Is this on them? Henry thought about office meetings where budgets were cut, about warnings he had put in reports that got ignored, about a day 3 years ago when he had walked out and told himself he was done. Some of it is, he admitted. They know those covers seize up. They know the system is old. They also know people don't like paying higher utility fees. Things get pushed. Corners get rounded. And some of it is on you? Mike asked, not cruelly, just wanting a clear line. Henry did not shy away. Yeah, he said. Some of it is on me. I stopped yelling when I should have yelled louder. I kept my head down when I knew better. I left and told myself someone else would handle it. Buster shifted in Mike's lap and reached a paw toward Henry, as if he could touch that guilt. Henry stared at the little dog's paw for a long second, then gently rested his own hand beside it. But tonight, Henry went on, I open that cover. And if I get in trouble for that, I can live with it. What I couldn't live with was walking past and pretending I didn't hear her. Nobody argued with that. After some time that felt stretched and thin, a young vet tech came out with a notepad and a pen. Mr. Richards? She asked. Dr. Perez asked me to get your full statement. Henry stood with a slow groan and followed her to a small side office. He told the story from the first strange bark to the moment Goldie went limp on his leg. He did not skip the part where he used a jack he was not technically supposed to use on public equipment. He did not skip the part where he heard the valves starting up and swore under his breath. The tech wrote everything down, her face neutral but her eyes soft whenever he mentioned the dog's cries. When she finished, she had him sign. Thank you, she said. We're going to keep this with her file. If anyone from the city calls, Dr. Perez will handle it. Henry left the office and walked back into the waiting room. Laura and Mike were sitting closer now, shoulders touching, Buster curled entirely in Laura's lap. The puppy looked smaller somehow, his earlier frantic energy burned out. They get your story? Mike asked. Henry nodded. They've got more paperwork on me than I've seen in years. Laura huffed out a weak laugh that turned almost into a sob. So what happens now? She asked. Now we wait, I guess, Henry said. And we hope she's as tough on the inside as she looked fighting that water. Time dragged. People came and went, dogs trotting in and limping out, cats complaining loudly from crates. None of it touched their little circle. Eventually, Nina returned. Her expression had changed again. There was still tension in it, but also something like cautious hope. She made it through the worst of the shock, Nina said. Her heart rate is more stable. The oxygen is helping. We need to operate on the leg as soon as we're sure she can handle anesthesia. If we don't, it'll heal wrong and cause her pain for the rest of her life. Then do it, Laura said at once. Mike glanced at her, then nodded. Whatever it costs, we'll figure it out. Nina gave them a number anyway, and Henry saw Mike's eyes widen just a fraction, the math already starting in his head about bills and kids and everything else. Laura didn't flinch, though. We'll pay it, she said. Just save her. Nina nodded. We'll prep her now. It'll take a few hours. You can go home and rest if you want, or you can stay. But I promise we'll call the second we have news. Laura shook her head. I'm not leaving. Neither am I, Mike added. Henry hesitated. If it's all right, he said to them, I'd like to stick around too. Feels wrong to walk out before we know she's through surgery. Laura looked at him like she was seeing him clearly for the first time, not just as the stranger who had appeared with their bleeding dog. Of course you're staying, she said. If she wakes up, I want her to smell you here. You're part of this family mess now, whether you like it or not. That pulled a small, tired smile from everyone, even Nina. I'll have someone bring out coffee, she said. You'll need it. She disappeared again, leaving them with that thin thread of hope to hold. Hours later, after dozing in chairs and pacing short lines on the linoleum, they finally saw Nina come back through the treatment door. This time there was no visible worry furrowing her brow. She looked worn but solid. Surgery went as well as we could have asked, she said. Laura covered her mouth with both hands. Mike let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped in his chest all night. Buster barked once, sharp, then stared at Nina as if waiting for the rest. We set the fractures with pins, Nina continued. We'll need follow-up and rehab, but she should be able to walk and even run again if everything heals properly. We'll watch her lungs closely for the next 24 hours. Those are still fragile. But if infection doesn't set in and her breathing keeps improving, she let that hang, and it was enough. Can we see her? Laura asked, tears on her cheeks now, finally free to fall. For a minute, Nina said. One at a time and stay quiet. She's groggy and hurting. She led Laura back first. Mike stayed with Buster, holding the puppy tight against his chest. Henry sat alone for a moment, staring at the floor, and felt something he had not felt in a while. Not joy, not yet, but a loosening of a tight knot he had carried around for years, tied to water and drains and things that went wrong underground. When his turn came, Nina walked him to the kennel room. Goldie lay on a soft pad with blankets around her, and 4-line in her leg and tubes taped near her muzzle. Her bandaged leg looked bulky and wrong, but her eyes were half open, dull but present. She watched him as he stepped closer. Hey there, girl, he said softly. You gave everyone a scare. Her tail moved a little, just the tip. It was enough. Henry reached through the bars and rested his fingers lightly against her neck, feeling the faint vibration of a sleepy, drugged dog still holding on. Your boy did good, he murmured. Little guy yelled at me until I did something. You owe him some extra treats when you're up to it. After a minute, Nina touched his arm. We should let her sleep now, she said. You can come back tomorrow. She'll be clearer then. They walked back to the front together. At the desk, Nina handed Laura a stack of papers. These are discharge estimates based on best case, she said. I left out anything that isn't relevant medically. It still makes them look bad, so be ready. Let them be mad, Laura said. We're not hiding what happened. Nina nodded once. But I want you to know, we've had complaints about those drains before. This isn't just your street. If someone finally pushes hard enough, they might actually fix something this time. Henry's stomach tightened. Complaints like what? He asked. Pets getting hurt? Pets, raccoons, even a kid almost getting his bike wheel stuck and going over, Nina said. Nothing as bad as this, at least not that we've seen here. But I've heard things. She looked at Henry. And now that I know you used to work with those systems, don't be surprised if the city calls you. They like to drag the old guys back in when there's trouble brewing. A thought formed in Henry's mind that he did not like. What kind of trouble? He asked. Nina sighed. There's a storm front rolling in tomorrow night, she said. Big one, they say. If those drains are already backing up and covers are seizing, you know better than anyone what that means. Henry did know. Images flashed through his memory. Water pushing up through gutters, streets turning into shallow rivers, basements flooding, the soundtrack of phones ringing non-stop at the utilities office. He also saw Goldie's head barely above the water in the drain, and the way the pipes had roared after he pulled her out. If the system's that weak, he said slowly, a big storm could push it past what it can handle. Nina looked like she wanted to say more but held back. Just keep your eyes open, she said. You see something off, call it in. And if the city calls you first, don't ignore the number. They left the clinic just before dawn, exhausted. Mike drove this time, with Laura beside him and Buster curled between them, head resting on the center console. Henry rode in his own truck behind them, following the red glow of their tail lights back toward Oak Creek Drive. As he turned onto their street, he slowed. The manhole where everything had started was no longer open. Someone had come during the night and dropped the cover back into place. It sat flush with the road, silent and still, as if nothing had ever happened there. But now there were 2 orange traffic cones set around it and a strip of bright tape stretched between them. A laminated sign hung off the tape. Even from his truck, Henry could read the bold black letters. Do not tamper. City property. Report all incidents immediately. He pulled over and stared at the sign, jaw tightening. His old life and his new mess had just collided in 8 cheap words. As he sat there, his phone buzzed in his pocket for the first time in hours. He pulled it out and looked at the screen. The caller ID showed a number he knew too well from his days on the job. City Utilities, Storm Division. The phone kept buzzing in his hand while the sealed manhole sat quiet in front of him and the first fat drops of rain began to tap against his windshield. Henry stared at the caller ID for another heartbeat, then hit accept and brought the phone to his ear. Yeah, he said. This is Henry. A man's voice came through, tight and controlled. Mr. Richards? This is Ethan Ward with City Utilities. Storm Division. Henry closed his eyes for a second. Of course. They had sent the inspector he had already managed to annoy once in his life without even trying. I know who you are, Henry said. You put the cones and tape out already. That was quick. Ethan ignored the comment. We got a report that a citizen opened a sealed manhole on Oak Creek Drive last night, he said. I've also just received a medical report from a local vet about an injured dog pulled from that same drain. Your name is all over it. She's alive because of that, Henry shot back. If you called to yell at me for saving her, you can hang up and send the ticket in the mail. There was a small pause on the other end, then Ethan spoke again, a little less stiff. I'm not calling to yell, he said. I'm calling because there's a major storm cell moving in and we've already got sensors showing high levels in that line. You worked these systems for decades. I need to know exactly what shape that section is in. And I need to know it now. Henry let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. So this isn't just about a warning sign, he said. It's about the pipes under it getting ready to choke. Yes, Ethan replied. Look, I read your older reports. You flagged the Oak Creek branch 3 times before you retired. I can't change that nobody fixed it back then. But I'm on shift tonight, and if things go bad, it's going to be my name on the board in the control room. So are you going to help me or not? That knocked some of the anger out of Henry. He knew that feeling of your name being the one tied to whatever happened on the ground. I'll help, he said. Where are you? Headed your way, Ethan answered. I'm 3 minutes out. Stay put. We'll walk the street and you can show me what you saw. Henry hung up and put the phone on the dash. The rain picked up a little, tapping harder on the glass now in a steady pattern. He watched the cones around the manhole sway slightly in the growing wind. 3 minutes later, a white city truck turned onto Oak Creek Drive and rolled slowly up beside him. The door opened and a man in his early 30s climbed out, wearing a high-visibility vest over a dark shirt and holding a tablet in one hand. His hair was already getting wet, but he didn't seem to notice. He walked over to Henry's window. Henry got out of his truck to meet him, shutting the door behind him. "Mr. Richards," Ethan said, sticking his hand out. "Thanks for not letting this go to voicemail." Henry shook his hand. "You sounded like a man who actually reads the numbers, not just the talking points," he said. "What are the sensors saying?" Ethan turned the tablet so Henry could see the simple map on the screen. A line representing the storm system wound across it, with sections glowing in different colors. The branch under Oak Creek was a bright yellow shading toward orange. "We've got elevated flow already and the main front hasn't even hit yet," Ethan said. "If debris is blocking this section, pressure will build. If it builds too much, the water's going to look for other ways out." "Manholes," Henry said. "Street grates. Low-lying yards. Basements." "Exactly," Ethan replied. He looked at the covered drains surrounded by cones. "You opened this one. You saw water behavior." "Last night it was surging hard," Henry said. "That was before the rain we're about to get. It handled it, but just barely. And that was after I gave it a dog to cough up." He pointed down the street. "What worries me more is that one." Ethan followed his gaze. 2 more covers sat further along the curve, near driveways and a side inlet by the curb. "What's wrong with those?" Ethan asked. "They look fine on paper." "On paper and under boots are 2 different things," Henry said. "Those 2 covers didn't get maintained the way they should. I remember the notes. I remember getting told to monitor instead of fix. If they're seized and something gets jammed in the line further down, pressure will push up wherever it can. Maybe here. Maybe some other poor street." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You're telling me we should get them open now, before the worst of the rain?" "I'm telling you if you wait until water's knee-deep, you won't get them open at all," Henry said. "Not safely anyway." Ethan stared at the covers another second, then the sky. The rain was steady now, a straight fall instead of scattered drops. "All right," he said. "We'll open them. But we do this by the book. Cones, tape, proper tools, 2 people minimum at each point. I'm not losing some teenager trying to be a hero because they wander near a live hole." "Fine by me," Henry said. "I've done enough stupid hero work for 1 week." They headed back to Ethan's truck, grabbed more cones, flags, and an official city pry bar from the back. Henry could not help muttering, "Nice to see the city still buys the good ones." Ethan snorted. "Nice to see someone who knows how to use them." Together they set up a safety ring around the next manhole and inlet. Ethan logged their location on his tablet and radioed in their status while Henry planted his boots and slid the bar into the cover slot. This one moved easier than the night before, but it still fought him. Between the 2 of them, though, they got it up far enough for Ethan to shine a light down. Water rushed past below, not full yet but fast. "That's not awful," Ethan said. "I've seen worse." "Yeah," Henry said slowly. "But watch the swirl." The current was already spinning leaves and trash in tight circles against one wall where the shaft narrowed. "If anything big goes in there, it's going to lodge right there. You'll have a plug in minutes." Ethan grimaced. "We should send a crew with a vacuum truck." "You should," Henry agreed. "But by the time they get here, this storm will be on top of us." His stomach nodded, and not just with worry about pipes. "You got anyone checking the open ditches near the Carlson's place? And the rear easement behind their yards?" Ethan checked his screen and frowned. "No active work orders there," he said. "Why?" Henry looked toward the Carlson's house. He could see their front windows lit, a shape moving behind the glass. He thought of Goldie lying on the clinic pad, of Buster's small body shaking in Laura's lap, of the way the manhole had almost taken more than just a dog. Because if those rear ditches are clogged and the storm hits like you say, the water might not even wait for the drains, Henry said. It'll just roll straight at the houses. As if in answer, a crack of thunder rolled over them. The rain picked up another level, sheets now instead of lines. Ethan swore under his breath. "All right," he said. You go walk the back. I'll stay here and keep this one monitored until the truck arrives. Take your phone. Call me if you see anything you don't like. Henry stared at him. You're letting me walk your system without a vest or a badge? Ethan huffed. You've been walking it longer than I've been alive, he said. Just don't fall in. Henry didn't bother arguing. He jogged down the sidewalk toward the side path that led behind the row of houses. The rain soaked his hair and coveralls in seconds, making the fabric cling to his knees, but he kept moving. As he turned the corner around the Carlsons' fence, he heard something through the sound of the rain, sharp, shrill barking. His heart jumped, but it wasn't Goldie. It was higher, lighter. Buster. The puppy came into view a second later, scrambling along the muddy strip between the back fences and the shallow ditch. His fur was plastered to his small frame, and his ears were slick against his head, but he didn't care. He ran toward Henry, then spun around and tore back toward the far end of the ditch, stopping there to bark and paw at the overflowing edge. You again, Henry muttered, breath puffing out of him. What are you trying to show me this time? He hurried after the pup. The ditch that ran behind the houses was meant to carry runoff away toward a wider channel, but right now it was a mess. Fallen branches, plastic bags, and yard waste choked the narrow channel. Water rammed into the blockage, piling up behind it and spilling over into the grass that sloped toward the back fences. It had already reached halfway up the boards in a couple of places. On the other side of one fence, Henry heard muffled shouting and the high voices of children. Buster barked even louder and tried to jump into the rising water, but Henry grabbed him around the middle just in time. No, Henry snapped. You're not going swimming in that. The puppy wriggled but then twisted in his hands, stretching his neck to bark toward the fence instead. At that exact moment, a small hand reached through the slats and grabbed the top of the fence like someone was trying to climb. Hey! Henry yelled over the rain. Who's back there? A boy's face, maybe 8 years old, pressed to a gap in the boards. His dark hair was wet and his eyes were big. Our yard is flooding, he shouted. Mom said stay away from the back, but Tyler dropped his ball and now the water's in the grass and get away from the fence. Henry barked. You hear me? Both of you, back up from it right now. The boy flinched at the tone, but he nodded and disappeared. Henry set Buster down and pulled his phone with wet fingers, dialing Ethan. The call connected on the second ring. Ward, Ethan answered, breathless. Talk. We've got a clogged rear ditch behind Oak Creek, Henry said. Water's already pushing up against the fences. Kids in at least 1 yard. If the blockage lets go all at once, it's going to slam right into the backlots. You need sandbags and a crew here now. All our trucks are spread out, Ethan said, cursing. I can reroute one, but it'll take time. We don't have time, Henry snapped. He looked at the blockage where water raged against the tangle of debris. It was going to give sooner or later, and if it did while kids were standing curious at the fence, it could knock them off their feet. He thought of old reports he had written, warnings he had typed that sat ignored in digital folders. This was exactly the kind of mess he had tried to prevent. He was done being the man who watched it unfold from a distance. I'm going to start clearing it by hand, he said. Get here as fast as you can and bring tools. Henry, don't you dare stand in that flow, Ethan said sharply. It doesn't take much water to knock you down. I mean it. Work from the side only. I know how water works, Henry growled. Just move. He hung up before Ethan could say more and shoved the phone back into his pocket. The rain drove at his face, making it hard to see, but he waded a few steps down the sloping bank until he was close enough to reach the edge of the pile. He stayed out of the main current, bracing 1 foot on a rock and 1 on a root. Buster stayed on the slightly higher ground, pacing and whining, his eyes never leaving Henry's hands. Henry reached for the nearest branch jammed into the mess and yanked. It resisted at first, then came free, sending a surge of water through the gap he created. He staggered but kept his balance. That's it, he muttered. We make a channel, let it bleed out instead of explode. Piece by piece he pulled branches, plastic, and clumps of leaves aside. Every bit he removed let more water move through, and every time the current shoved at his legs, he had to adjust his stance. Behind the fence, he could hear voices moving away from the back of the yard. Laura's voice rang out, sharp and firm now, not panicked. Inside, both of you. Now. That eased one part of his mind. At least the kids were off the fence line. The rest of his mind was focused on the weight of the water and the strain in his old joints. He was not 25 anymore. His shoulders burned. His hands went numb from the cold and the force of the flow. Yet he kept going. He thought of Goldie's head barely above the storm drain water. He thought of Buster's tiny body slamming against iron, begging him without words. He thought of how close they had been to losing her. Not again, he told himself. Not like this. A branch shifted deeper in the pile, and water punched through another gap. The entire blockage shuddered. For a second Henry froze, every sense warning him. If the whole thing went at once, the rush could sweep his legs out and send him down the ditch with the debris. Back, Henry! Someone shouted. He turned his head and saw Ethan running along the bank toward him, soaked to the skin, waving his arms. Get out of there! Henry hesitated. The flow was still building. If he stepped wrong, he would go down. But if he left the pile the way it was now, one good push of water might blow the whole mess out uncontrolled. He took one last grab, yanked a clump of bags free, and tossed them onto the bank. The blockage sagged but held. Then he scrambled back up the slope, hands digging into wet grass, boots slipping. For a second he slid down on his knee, and the water licked at his foot, threatening to pull him in. That was when Buster darted forward, grabbed the cuff of his coveralls in his teeth, and pulled. It wasn't strong enough to haul a grown man, but it slowed his slide just enough for Henry to jam his boot against a buried rock and shove himself up the rest of the way. He landed on his hands and knees near the top as Ethan reached them and grabbed his arm. Are you out of your mind? Ethan snapped, half dragging him back from the edge. You go in that, I'm not jumping after you. I stayed on the side, Henry panted. Just like you said. He glanced back at the blockage. Water now poured through several small channels instead of pressing in one big wall, easing the pressure. It was still high, but it was moving. We just bought your truck cruise time. Ethan looked, then swore again, but this time it sounded more like respect than anger. You also almost gave me a heart attack, he muttered. Next time wait for tools. 2 more city trucks pulled up at the end of the alley a minute later, men in rain gear jumping out with rakes and poles. Ethan ran to direct them, barking orders. Henry stood with his hands on his knees, breathing hard, while Buster pressed against his leg, tail wagging anxiously. Laura appeared at the back gate, hair plastered to her face, clutching a raincoat around her. She stared at the rushing water, then at Henry and Buster. You, she said, voice shaking. You can't stop. Seems like your dog's got a talent for dragging me into bad plumbing, Henry answered, trying for a weak grin. Laura wiped at her face, not sure if she was pushing away rain or tears. The kids said the water was at the fence, she said. They said Buster ran out the dog door and wouldn't stop barking at the back. I came out and saw you down there. For a second I thought you were going to, she cut herself off. Henry straightened slowly. I wasn't, he said, though he wasn't entirely sure that was true. I've been dealing with ditches longer than they've been alive. I know my limits. Sort of. They watched together as the crews worked the blockage into a safer shape, guided by Ethan's sharp gestures. The water level behind the debris started to drop inch by inch, dragging the flood line down the fence boards. This shouldn't have gotten this bad, Laura said quietly. You tried to tell them, and they didn't listen. And now we almost watched our backyard turn into a river. I should have pushed harder back then, Henry said. Filed more reports. Brought it to meetings. I told myself it was just pipes and budgets. Tonight reminded me it's never just pipes. It's people on the other end. Laura looked at him for a long second. You're here now, she said. That's what matters to us. His phone buzzed again in his pocket. For a second he thought it might be another call from Ethan's control room, but when he pulled it out, he saw a different number. Oak Ridge Animal Clinic. His heart jumped. Hello, he answered. Nina's voice came through, steady but warmer than before. Henry, it's Dr. Perez. I called the Carlson's house, but no one answered, so I tried you. I figured if they're not home, you might be with them. Henry turned so he could hear better, though the rain still hammered around him. "They're here," he said. "We've got a bit of a flood situation behind their place, but crews are on it." "What's going on?" "Goldie's doing better," Nina said. "Her lungs are holding. No sign of fluid buildup so far. She's groggy, but she's responsive. I thought they'd want to know she made it through the first critical window." Henry let out a breath that almost turned into a laugh. "That's the best thing I've heard all day," he said. "Do you want to tell them yourself?" "Put me on speaker," Nina said. Henry moved closer to Laura and tapped his phone. "It's Nina," he said. "She's got news." Laura's eyes went wide as he held the phone out. "Nina?" she said, almost afraid to hope. "Tell me." "She's stable," Nina said. "Still sore, still on medication, but she's wagging her tail at anyone who says her name. If things stay this way, you can come sit with her this evening, maybe even bring Buster for a supervised visit." Buster barked at the sound of his name, tail whipping so hard his whole body rocked. Laura pressed a hand to her mouth and started to cry outright. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you so much. We'll be there as soon as this settles down." After they hung up, Laura turned and hugged Henry so suddenly he barely had time to brace. He patted her back awkwardly and used to sudden contact. "You brought her out of that hole," she said into his shoulder. "You're helping keep the water out of our house. I don't know how to say what that means." "You just did," Henry replied softly. The rest of the storm was a blur of movement and noise. The city crews cleared the blockage, the ditch flow steadied, and Ethan got updates from other parts of town. There were still trouble spots, but Oak Creek held. No basements flooded on their stretch, no yards turned into lakes, and no kids were swept off their feet. By the time the rain finally started to ease, a gray light was settling over everything. Ethan walked over, mud streaked on his pants, exhaustion on his face. "Control says the line's holding below design but above comfort," he said. "Which is their fancy way of saying we got lucky." "We didn't just get lucky," Henry said. "You listened." And the pup yelled. He glanced down at Buster, who was now sitting calmly between them, as if he had not just dragged a retired utility worker into 2 separate rescues in 24 hours. Ethan followed his gaze and shook his head with a small smile. "If this dog ever learns to talk, I'm resigning," he said. Then his expression turned more serious. "Listen about the manhole and the report. I spoke to my supervisor. Technically, yeah, we're supposed to log unauthorized access. But I also sent in an incident note that says if you hadn't opened it, we'd be filing a different kind of report today. One with the body count." Henry shifted uncomfortably. "What did they say?" "They said we're not pursuing any action," Ethan answered. "Official line is you acted as a good Samaritan in an emergency. Unofficial line is they'd like to know if you'd consider coming in as a consultant when this is over. We've got old systems and not enough old heads who understand them." Henry blinked. "You want me back in the building?" "Not full-time," Ethan said quickly. "I know you walked for reasons. But maybe part-time. Maybe on your terms this time. We need people who actually see what's at the end of these pipes, not just graphs." Henry looked down the length of the ditch, at the water moving in a controlled, steady path now, at the fences that had stayed standing. He thought about the years he had spent trying to shout into boardrooms about exactly this kind of thing, and how he had given up when the shouting wore him down. "I'll think about it," he said finally. "I'm not promising, but I'll think." "That's more than I hoped for," Ethan said. "I'll tell them that's a maybe in your language." He clapped Henry on the shoulder and walked off toward his trucks. Henry watched the crews start to pack up, then turned back toward the houses. The back gate opened and 2 small figures burst out, ignoring their mother's scolding. The Carlson kids skidded to a stop at the edge of the safer, lower water and stared at Henry and Buster. "Mom said you saved Goldie," the younger one said, eyes wide. "And you saved our yard. And you saved Buster from getting swept away." Henry felt his face heat, which was ridiculous in the damp chill. "Your mom and dad and this crazy dog did most of that," he said. "I just know where the pipes run." The older child reached down and scratched Buster's damp head. "He likes you," she said. "He doesn't like everyone." "He yelled at me until I moved," Henry admitted. Smart little guy. Laura came up behind them and rested her hands on their shoulders. We're going to the clinic in a little while, she told Henry. Do you want to come with us? I think someone there will want to see you. Henry opened his mouth to say he didn't want to get in the way of their family moment, but then Buster made the decision for him. The puppy grabbed the leg of Henry's coveralls in his teeth again and tugged, just like he had by the ditch, only this time there was no danger, just insistence. Henry looked down at him, then at Laura, then at the kids. For the first time in a long time, the idea of being part of something, instead of just passing through, did not scare him as much as it used to. Yeah, he said. Yeah, I'll come. That evening, after the worst of the storm had passed and the emergency crews were busy in other parts of town, Henry found himself back in the familiar hallway of Oak Ridge Animal Clinic, walking beside the Carlsons and Buster. The puppy trotted ahead, nose to the floor, then stopped in front of the kennel room door as if he knew exactly where to go. Nina met them inside, tired but smiling. She's been waiting for you, she said. I swear she knows the sound of your footsteps already. Goldie lay on the pad where Henry had seen her before, but her eyes were clearer now. When she spotted them, her tail thumped hard, and when she saw Buster, it thumped even harder. The puppy yipped and pulled on his leash until Nina nodded and let him get close under her watchful eye. He climbed right up against his mother's side, careful of the bandaged leg without even being told. Goldie turned her head and licked his face, slow and thorough, as if checking that every part of him was really there. The kids crowded in on one side, Laura and Mike on the other. Henry stood a little back at first, but Goldie's gaze flicked to him and stayed. She shifted her head, sniffed the air, and then stretched her neck just far enough that her nose bumped his hand where it hung by his side. He let his fingers rest on her head for a moment, feeling the warmth under the fur, the steady breath just below the surface. You did all the hard work, he murmured. I just held on. Nina watched the whole quiet scene, then said, she'll need time, rest, and a lot of patience. But she's going to walk out of here. Mike nodded. Whatever she needs, she gets. Laura looked at Henry. That includes you, she said. You need anything, you come knock. Even if it's just someone to argue with about drains. Henry chuckled softly. Careful, he said. You invite an old utility man into your life, you're going to hear a lot about slopes and runoff. We can take it, she said. We owe you more than we can ever pay back. You don't owe me, Henry replied. You owe that little guy. He nodded at Buster, who nuzzled deeper into Goldie's neck. He saw something wrong and refused to let it go. That's all I did too before I got tired. Maybe it's time I learned from him. Later, when visiting hours were over and goodbyes had been said, Henry went home. The storm had left puddles in the streets and a thin layer of grit near the drains, but Oak Creek Drive was still standing. His house was still dry. He washed the mud and grease off in the shower, wincing when the water hit the bruises across his ribs and knees. After that he made a simple dinner he barely tasted and sat at his small kitchen table with his phone beside him. The screen lit up with a new message. It was from an unknown number, but the text was simple. This is Ethan Ward. Thanks for today. I meant what I said about the consulting. Call me when you're ready. Henry stared at the message, then set the phone down without answering. Not yet. He wasn't ready to make that decision tonight. But for the first time since he'd walked away from the job, the idea of going back in some form didn't feel like surrender. It felt like a chance to do it right. There was a knock at his front door. It was light but fast, an impatient little patter. Henry frowned, pushed his chair back, and walked down the hall. When he opened the door, Buster stood on his front step, damp paws on the mat, leash trailing behind him. The puppy looked up at Henry and wagged his tail, then glanced back over his shoulder. Laura and Mike stood a few feet away on the walkway, smiling with the kids hovering behind them. Goldie was not there yet, but Henry could see her shape in his mind, resting at the clinic, breathing steady. We thought he was going to drag the door off the hinges if we didn't walk him over, Laura said. He wanted to check on you. And we wanted to ask something, Mike added. He rubbed the back of his neck, searching for the right words. When Goldie comes home, she's going to need a lot of care. The kids have school, we both work weird hours, and she trusts you now. Buster obviously does. Would you be willing to be their second home? You know, walks, company, a place to stay when we're slammed. Not as a favor, more like family. For a second Henry couldn't speak. All the noises of his house over the years, the clank of dishes, the murmur of the TV, the quiet that had filled it since his boys left, ran through his head. He pictured Goldie's head on his knee, Buster tugging his pant leg toward trouble, kids' laughter in his yard. He felt the weight of his empty evenings, the ones he'd been planning to spend alone. And all at once, they didn't feel so fixed anymore. Yeah, he said, his voice rough but sure. I can do that. I'd like to do that. The kids cheered softly. Buster jumped up, planting his front paws on Henry's thigh, and Henry steadied him with one hand. All right, partner, he said to the pup. Looks like we're in this together now. As they stood there on the doorstep, with the damp street behind them and the storm clouds finally breaking apart overhead, Henry realized something simple and deep down. The drain hadn't just tried to swallow a dog. It had almost swallowed his chance to matter again. But a small golden puppy had refused to let that happen. Buster tugged him gently over the threshold, nose already sniffing at the corners of Henry's living room like he owned the place. Henry followed, and for the first time in a long time, when he closed his door, it didn't feel like he was shutting the world out. It felt like he was letting a new one in. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end of this story. If you enjoyed this story, I promise you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more thrilling as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.